Lucky Blue Smith didn't become famous the normal way. He became famous like a visual virus. One day, he was just a blonde kid from Utah. The next, fashion and the internet started treating his face like a global shortcut, the boy who looks like a myth. In 2015, Teen Vogue literally called him model of the moment. And once that label sticks, it stops being a compliment. It becomes a trap. Because the world doesn't watch you to understand you. It watches you to confirm a fantasy, or catch it breaking. But Lucky's story isn't just pretty model goes viral. It's a career built on speed, reinvention, and the strange reality of being famous before you're old enough to control the narrative. He was signed young, moved with his family for the industry, and even played drums in a family band, like someone trying to prove he's more than the photos. Then the spotlight got bigger and messier. Because once you become an internet face, your life becomes a public debate. Relationships, fatherhood, trad wife culture headlines, and the kind of constant commentary that turns a person into content. So this video isn't a highlight reel. It's a story in 6 parts, where Lucky came from, what shaped him, how he broke into the top tier, how fame mutated into obsession, the controversy cycles around his image, and what his legacy might actually be in a fashion era that eats young icons alive. Because the real question isn't, why was Lucky famous? It's, how did he survive being famous that young without disappearing? Most people meet Lucky Blue Smith as an image first. A jawline, a stare, platinum hair, the kind of face that makes brands act like they discovered gold, even though the person inside that face is still figuring out who he is. That's the first truth about Lucky. His career was never built on modeling skills alone. It was built on instant mythology. The fashion world has always loved a certain kind of boy, angelic, sharp, almost unreal, and Lucky landed inside that archetype so perfectly that he became viral before he could fully consent to what viral fame costs. But Lucky is more complicated than the archetype. He wasn't raised like a Lone Star City kid chasing parties and paparazzi. He came from a tight family world, and that changes how he moves. Profiles note he has 3 sisters, and they all modeled together, with their parents supporting the career direction early. That family structure matters because it explains why he didn't collapse into the classic young male model chaos storyline. He had a unit around him, sometimes protective, sometimes pressuring, but not empty. There's also the I'm more than this instinct that shows up in his choices. Lucky played drums in a family band called the Atomics, like he needed a second identity that wasn't just being photographed. That's a pattern you see in people who get reduced too early. They seek another lane, not always for success, but for air. And then there's the modern twist. Lucky isn't only a model anymore. He's become a public figure inside a different kind of spotlight. Relationships, marriage, fatherhood, and the internet's obsession with aesthetic lifestyles. His relationship with Nara Smith has been heavily covered, framed as a highly visible fashion couple in pop culture media. So the real question isn't whether Lucky is attractive or famous. It's whether he can control a narrative that was built around him when he was barely old enough to drive. Because when the world falls in love with a fantasy version of you, you spend the next decade either living inside it or fighting your way out. To understand how Lucky ended up inside that fantasy, we have to go back to the beginning, Utah, a young discovery, and the moment the fashion machine decided he was the next it boy. Lucky Blue Smith didn't enter fashion through the front door. He entered through a side entrance called timing, and the industry slammed the main doors open behind him. He was signed young, around 12, and the story already sounds unreal. An agent sees the look, the potential, the something, and suddenly a kid from Utah is no longer living a normal schedule. He's living a calendar made of castings, flights, fittings, and a new kind of pressure that doesn't care whether you're emotionally ready. Then his family made a move that tells you everything about how serious this became. Reports describe his parents moving the whole family to Los Angeles, homeschooling the younger kids, and turning the Smith siblings into a unit inside the fashion machine. And here's where the Lucky myth truly begins. Early on, he was photographed by Hedi Slimane, an image maker with instant industry gravity, and suddenly, Lucky wasn't just a new model. He was a new obsession, the kind that spreads fast because it's easy to understand in one glance. But the biggest accelerator wasn't a runway. It was the internet. Lucky became famous in the era when male modeling stopped being niche and started becoming teen idol adjacent. He didn't just have editorial credibility, he had followers, fan accounts, airport crowds, and that strange modern phenomenon where people don't simply admire a model, they stalk the idea of him. Even journalists wrote about the intensity of his cult-like following. Then came the move that turned his look into a logo. He dyed his hair platinum blonde at his agency's suggestion, and it became his signature, like a brand stamp you could spot from across a feed. And here's the part that makes his rise feel different from other it boys. While his face was going viral, he was also trying to prove he wasn't only a face. He played drums in the Atomics, the family band, like he needed a second language besides being photographed, something he controlled with his hands, not his cheekbones. So by the time the world crowned him model of the moment, Lucky wasn't just modeling. He was living inside a fantasy the public helped create, one that would eventually demand more, ask more, and start judging him for anything that didn't match the myth. There's a moment in every it model career when the industry stops introducing you and starts assuming you're already a fact. Lucky hit that moment while he was still basically a teenager. He walked major runways and landed high-visibility fashion work at the exact time male modeling was becoming mainstream online content. That combination is dangerous because it turns modeling into a popularity contest, and popularity contests don't forgive awkward growth phases. They want you to be finished, polished, and consistent while you're still becoming an adult. In 2015, the media openly framed him as a phenomenon. Teen Vogue's Model of the Moment label wasn't just a headline, it was a signal that Lucky had crossed from industry success into pop culture fascination. But here's what people outside fashion don't see. Being everywhere doesn't always mean being secure. When you become the look, you also become replaceable the second the industry gets bored. The machine loves you loudly until it doesn't. And the more your fame depends on a vibe, the more fragile it becomes. That's why Lucky's career is interesting. He understood the need to diversify early. Not just with music, but with his public presence. He leaned into social platforms, built a recognizable identity, and kept himself visible even when fashion cycles shifted. That's the modern survival strategy. When the runway changes its favorites, the internet can keep you alive, if you know how to manage it. But visibility creates a new problem. Your personal life stops being private. For Lucky, the next era of attention wasn't purely about clothing. It became about relationships, fatherhood, and the online obsession with his real-life aesthetic. He became a parent young. His daughter, Gravity Blue, was born in 2017 from a previous relationship, something that pulled him into a different type of scrutiny than most male models face at that age. Then his relationship with Nara Smith amplified the spotlight again, because they weren't just dating. They became an internet symbol, fashion couple, young family, and the kind of lifestyle content that attracts both admiration and backlash. People magazine and other outlets covered their relationship timeline and the growing attention around them. This is where the story turns, because in the internet era, once you become a symbol, you stop being treated like a person. You're treated like a battleground. People project fantasies onto you, then punish you for not living up to them. They argue about your choices as if they own your life. They turn your partner into a character and your family into content. And that sets up the most dramatic phase of Lucky's narrative. Not a classic scandal like crime or cancellation, but the kind of modern controversy that can be just as intense. The war over image, the war over authenticity, the war over whether you're real or curated. Lucky Blue Smith's controversies aren't the kind that explode with one headline and end in court. They're the modern kind, worse in some ways, because they don't have a clean ending. They live in the comments section. Once Lucky became an internet-famous face, the public didn't just watch his work. They watched his life choices like they were entitled to vote on them. Relationships, age gaps, parenting, marriage, faith, aesthetic lifestyle, and the never-ending debate over what is real versus what is content. This is the new celebrity scandal formula. The scandal isn't always something you did wrong. It's the fact that strangers can't stop talking about you like a character they're writing. And Lucky's story sits right in the middle of that. He became a father young, and for many people online, that's not processed with empathy. It's processed as judgment. They don't ask how hard it is. They ask if it fits their narrative of who he should be. Then when he later built a highly visible relationship with Nara Smith, another public-facing personality, his life became even more of a symbol. Their relationship and marriage have been widely covered in mainstream pop culture outlets, which only intensifies the attention loop. From there, the discourse expands into culture wars. Some people romanticize them as young love and beautiful family. Others accuse the content of being too curated, too performative, too perfect. Some praise traditional roles, others criticize what they see as an aestheticized version of domesticity. And the problem is, none of those arguments are really about Lucky or Nara as human beings. They're about what the audience wants them to represent. That's what makes this era so psychologically intense. Because when you're turned into a symbol, you can't win. If you defend yourself, you're bothered. If you ignore it, you're guilty. If you change, you're fake. If you stay the same, you're problematic. The goalposts move because the internet isn't searching for truth. It's searching for a feeling. This is also where Lucky's early myth becomes a burden. When he was a teen model, the fantasy was simple. Beautiful boy, runway star, platinum hair, global attention. But real life doesn't stay inside fantasy. Real life ages, changes, gets complicated. People get tired. People have responsibilities. People choose love, family, priorities that are not optimized for fan edits. And the moment that shift happens, some audiences react like they were betrayed because they weren't following a person. They were following an idea. So if you're looking for the scandal in Lucky's story, it isn't one event. It's the collision between public fantasy and private reality. And the deeper question becomes, what happens next to a model who was crowned by the internet as a teenager? Does he stay trapped in the myth that made him famous, or does he build a new identity that can survive adulthood? That's the final chapter, because Lucky's real success might not be his biggest campaign. It might be whether he can control his story long enough to live it. Lucky Blue Smith's real challenge isn't staying handsome, it's staying human. Because when you become famous as a teenager, the public freezes you at the age they first loved you. They don't want you to grow. They want the same face, the same vibe, the same fantasy, forever. And adulthood is the enemy of fantasy. So if Lucky has a long game, it's this: outlast the internet's version of him. That means turning a viral face into something more durable. Work, credibility, and a life that isn't built for strangers' approval. It also means accepting a truth most young icons learn the hard way. You can't control what people project onto you, but you can control what you keep building. Lucky's career has already proven he can adapt. He moved from runway phenomenon to mainstream visibility, then into a new era where his identity is tied to family life and public lifestyle narratives. Whether people love that or hate it, it shows one thing. He didn't disappear when the model of the moment spotlight moved on. And maybe that's his most underrated talent, staying present without begging for attention. Because the loudest scandal era is usually temporary. What lasts is consistency, time, and the ability to evolve without apologizing for evolving. So what does Lucky Blue Smith's name mean now? Not just the blonde model who went viral, not just the internet's favorite face, but a case study in modern fame. How the fashion world and the algorithm can crown you overnight, and how difficult it is to keep your identity intact afterward. If you had to choose one word for lucky, myth, or growth, which one would it be?